wall didn't just crack. It gave way like a secret that had been held too long. Ray Willis pulled his pry bar back. A chunk of plaster came with it, and behind that, something that shouldn't have been there. An envelope, yellow with age, sealed. Then another, and another. They fell like confessions, 200 letters, hidden for decades in the walls of a mailman's house, each one a piece of evidence, each one a crime that was never punished, each one a family that lost everything while the powerful got richer. Evelyn Brennan stood in her grandfather's living room watching envelopes pile at her feet. She was a federal prosecutor. She knew what evidence looked like. She knew what justice cost. What she didn't know was that her grandfather had spent 33 years building a case, waiting for someone with the power he never had. Waiting for her. The last envelope was different, thicker, sealed in red wax. Her name written on the front in his careful handwriting. No address, no stamp. Just 3 words that changed everything. Prosecutor Evelyn Brennan, Esquire. He'd known. 26 years before she found these letters. He'd known she'd be the one to finish what he couldn't start. The question was, would she? The house stood exactly as Evelyn Brennan remembered it. Same peeling white paint on the clapboard siding. Same crooked mailbox at the curb number 47, barely visible through rust. Same magnolia tree in the front yard. Older now, its branches thick as a man's thigh. Casting shadows across the porch where her grandfather used to sit every evening at 6 o'clock sharp, a habit he'd carried from his army days. Eve cut the engine. The rental car ticked in the Georgia heat. Beside her, Mackenzie looked up from her phone. This is it. This is it. 23 years old and her daughter still expected something more. Eve understood. She'd expected something more too once. That was before she'd learned that the most important things in life rarely looked impressive from the outside. She stepped out. September in Millbrook felt like standing inside someone's mouth. Humid. Close. The kind of heat that made your shirt stick to your back before you'd taken 3 steps. 6 months ago, she would have complained about it. Now she barely noticed. Grief had a way of making everything else background noise. The front door key was where the lawyer said it would be, under the 3rd flower pot from the left, the one with the crack running down the side like a lightning bolt. Eve's grandmother had kept geraniums in that pot, dead now. Everything dead now. Inside the house smelled of dust and time and something else. Old paper, maybe. The particular scent of a life lived quietly and then ended. Jesus, Kenzie said. When's the last time someone opened a window? Probably March. When Colonel Thomas Brennan had died in his sleep, aged 98. 3 months after his last birthday, and 2 weeks after he'd walked to the VFW hall for the monthly meeting. The coroner said his heart just stopped, worn out like an old engine that had run its course. Eve moved through the rooms. Living room with the same brown couch, same coffee table with the Reader's Digest magazines from 1987. Kitchen with the ancient avocado green refrigerator, humming like a dying bee. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, 900 square feet of a life reduced to inventory. Her grandfather's study was the smallest room, barely larger than a closet, a desk, a filing cabinet. a corkboard on the wall covered with photographs. Eve stopped in front of it. There he was, Thomas Brennan in his Army uniform, 1944, 18 years old and trying to look older. Thomas in his Mailman blues, 1952, holding up a letter like a prize. Thomas at the VFW Hall, 1989, surrounded by other old men in caps covered with pins. And there in the corner, a photograph Eve had never seen before. Thomas and a young girl, maybe 7 years old. The girl wore pigtails and a serious expression. Thomas had his hand on her shoulder, and he was looking down at her with something that might have been pride. Eve leaned closer. That girl was her. "Mom," Kenzie called from the living room. "There's a lawyer's card on the table. Says you should call him." Eve pulled the photograph from the corkboard. The tack came away easily like it had been waiting. On the back, in her grandfather's careful handwriting, Evelyn, age 7. The day she told me she'd be a lawyer. She didn't remember telling him that. Didn't remember the photograph being taken. But there it was, evidence of a moment she'd forgotten. The first of many such moments she'd discover. They spent the rest of the afternoon sorting. Kenzie handled it with the efficiency of someone who'd learned early that sentiment was a luxury. Her generation understood that. They had to. Eve found herself moving slower, touching things. The spines of books on the shelf, all military history and westerns. The coffee mug on the desk with "World's Best Grandpa" printed on the side, a gift she'd given him when she was 12. The bronze star in a frame on the wall awarded for valor at Normandy, June 6, 1944. Underneath the medal, a smaller frame, the mailman's creed typed on yellowed paper. Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. Her grandfather had been a mailman for 40 years. Not the kind who drove a truck, the kind who walked. Route 7 Millbrook's poorest neighborhoods, the places where the official postal service didn't always reach. He'd carried letters and packages and news and sometimes just conversation to people who needed it. "Funny," Kenzie said, appearing in the doorway. "You'd think a mailman would have had more stuff." He wasn't the stuff type. Yeah, but still. No TV, no computer. Hardly any clothes. It's like he lived in one room and ignored the rest. Eve looked around. Her daughter was right. The study showed signs of habitation. The rest of the house felt like a stage set, clean but unused. Maybe he did, Eve said. That night they ordered pizza from the only place in town that delivered. Sat on the porch eating it while the sun went down, and the cicadas started their evening screaming. Millbrook at dusk looked like a postcard from 1955. Main Street visible from the porch 2 blocks away. Church steeple. Post office. The Thornton building, tallest structure for 20 miles, all 8 stories of it. "You grew up here?" Kenzie asked. "Summers, until I was 12. And then Grandma died and Grandpa said I should stay in Atlanta with my parents. Said a girl needed to be in a place with opportunities. He was probably right. Probably. Eve had gone to good schools. University of Georgia for undergrad. Georgetown for law. Marine JAG Corps for 7 years. Federal prosecutor for 15 more. She'd built a life that her grandfather could never have imagined. And yet here she was back in Millbrook, sitting on his porch feeling like she'd left something important behind. and only just now realized it. Mrs. Patterson says hello. Eve turned. A woman stood at the edge of the yard, 70-something white hair, pink velour tracksuit, a casserole dish in her hands. I'm sorry. Mrs. Patterson lives next door. She saw you arrive and asked me to bring this over. Tuna casserole. Her specialty. The woman climbed the porch steps. Up close, Eve could see the careful makeup, the gold crucifix necklace, the eyes that were already cataloging everything. Small-town reconnaissance. I'm Dorothy Vaughn. I live across the street. Known your grandfather for, must be 30 years now. I'm Evelyn Brennan. This is my daughter, Mackenzie. I know who you are, dear. Your grandfather talked about you all the time. Federal prosecutor, he'd say. My granddaughter puts bad people in jail. He was very proud. Something twisted in Eve's chest. A feeling she'd been avoiding for 6 months. Grief was patient. It waited for moments like this. Thank you for the casserole. Dorothy set it on the porch railing. Didn't leave. You planning to sell? Haven't decided yet. Market's good right now. Thornton Properties has been buying up houses on this street. Redevelopment, they call it. Your grandfather turned them down twice. Did he? Oh yes. Last time was just a few months before he passed. David Thornton himself came by. Made an offer well above asking. Your grandfather said no thank you, this house had memories that weren't for sale. Dorothy paused. Course, now that he's gone, I suppose those memories go with him. Eve heard the question underneath. What are you going to do with the house? Are you one of us, or are you one of them? The people who leave and never come back. I appreciate you stopping by, Eve said. The prosecutor's voice, polite but final. Dorothy took the hint. Well, if you need anything, I'm at number 52, right across the way. She left. Kenzie waited until she was out of earshot. Redevelopment. That's never good. No, Eve said. It's not. They went inside as full dark fell. Eve showed Kenzie to the guest bedroom, the one that had been hers during those childhood summers. Same twin bed, same quilt with the star pattern, same window that looked out over the backyard where her grandfather had kept a vegetable garden. And sometimes late at night, sat in a lawn chair, staring at nothing. Eve took the master bedroom, her grandparents' room. The bed was made with military precision corners tucked tight. On the nightstand, a photograph of her grandmother, Helen Brennan, 1928 to 2012, county clerk for 35 years. A woman who'd known everyone's business and kept most of it to herself. Eve lay down on top of the covers, stared at the ceiling. The house settled around her, wood contracting in the cooling air, making the small noises old houses make. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. A car passed headlights, briefly illuminating the room. She thought about her husband. 6 months, and the wound still felt fresh. Daniel had been a Marine Afghanistan 2 tours. He'd survived firefights and IEDs and everything the war could throw at him, only to die in a car accident on I-285 in Atlanta. Drunk driver. Wrong place, wrong time. The kind of death that made no sense, that offered no closure, that left you angry at the universe. Her grandfather had called her the day after the funeral. Said 3 words, I'm here, Evelyn. That was all. No platitudes. No false comfort. just the statement of a fact. He was there. If she needed him, he was there. She'd meant to visit, meant to drive down and spend time with him. But federal cases didn't wait for grief. The office was always busy. There was always something. And now he was gone too. Eve closed her eyes, told herself she'd get up in a minute and brush her teeth. Instead, she drifted into an uneasy sleep. The kind where you're not sure if you're dreaming or just remembering. And woke 3 hours later to the sound of breaking glass. She was up and moving before her brain caught up. Muscle memory from JAG training. Down the hall. Into the living room. Kenzie was already there, phone in hand, flashlight app on. Someone threw a rock, Kenzie said. Through the front window. Eve looked. Sure enough, a baseball-sized hole in the window glass scattered across the floor, and a rock sitting in the middle of the debris. She went to the front door, opened it, stepped onto the porch. The street was empty. Whoever did it was gone. She went back inside, picked up the rock. Something was wrapped around it. Paper tied with string. She unwound it. Block letters. Black marker. 5 words, sell the house and leave. Kenzie read over her shoulder. Well, that's not subtle. No, Eve said. It's not. She called the police. They sent a patrol car. Young officer couldn't have been more than 25, took a report with the enthusiasm of someone who knew nothing would come of it. Vandalism. Happens sometimes. Probably kids. After he left, Eve and Kenzie swept up the glass, taped cardboard over the window, sat in the kitchen drinking coffee neither of them needed. You could sell, Kenzie said. We could be back in Atlanta by tomorrow night. Eve thought about it. The easy choice, the smart choice. Take whatever Thornton Properties was offering and walk away. Let someone else deal with the memories and the mystery and whatever else was hiding in this house. No, she said. No. Someone doesn't want me here. That means there's a reason to stay. Kenzie smiled. It was the smile Eve had seen 100 times growing up. The smile that said, I knew you'd say that. Okay then, Kenzie said. We're staying. What's next? Next, we find out why someone wants this house badly enough to throw rocks through windows. The contractor arrived at 8 the next morning. Ray Willis, 3rd-generation Millbrook, came recommended by the lawyer. He walked through the house with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen it all. Foundation's solid, he said. Roof needs work. Electrical's from the Eisenhower administration. Plumbing's better than I expected. You want to sell, I'd say, paint and patch. You want to keep it. We're looking at a full renovation. What would you do? Ray considered. Your grandfather was a good man. Delivered mail to my grandmother for 20 years. Never missed a day even when his hip was bad. This house meant something to him. I'd respect that. Then let's make it worth respecting. They started with the cosmetic stuff. Ray's crew began removing the old wallpaper in the living room, layers of it, probably 6 different patterns going back to the house's construction in 1947. Underneath the plaster was cracked but sound. Eve watched them work. There was something meditative about demolition, the careful violence of it, taking apart what was broken to reveal what could be saved. It was mid-morning when the wall broke. Ray was using a small pry bar removing a section of plaster near the window. The tool sank deeper than expected. He pulled it back. A chunk of plaster came with it. And behind that, something else. An envelope. Yellow with age. Sealed. Huh, Ray said. He reached in, pulled it out. Reached in again. Pulled out another. And another. There's a whole stack in here, he said. Eve came closer. Ray was right. The wall wasn't hollow, but it had been modified. A gap between the studs just wide enough to slide envelopes into, sealed up with plaster. Wallpapered over. Hidden. How many? Eve asked. Ray kept pulling. 10, 20, 30. They fell into a pile at his feet. Decades of correspondence preserved in the dark. I'd say close to 200, Ray said. Maybe more. They're in the other walls too. Look. He tapped the walls. Different sounds, hollow in places, solid in others. A pattern. He built hiding places, Ray said softly. All through the house. Your grandfather built hiding places. Eve knelt down, picked up an envelope. The paper was brittle but intact. The address was written in careful cursive. Mr. William Thornton, Sr., 1200 Peachtree Avenue, Millbrook, Georgia. The postmark said 1955. She opened it. Inside a single sheet of paper. Typed. Dear Mr. Thornton, this letter serves as official notice that I intend to file suit regarding the land transaction of March 15th, 1955. I have obtained legal counsel and have reason to believe the sale was conducted under duress and with fraudulent misrepresentation of property values. I expect to hear from your attorney within 10 business days. Respectfully, Sergeant Samuel Washington, USMC, retired. Eve read it twice, looked at the envelope again. No indication it had ever been mailed. She picked up another letter. This one was addressed to Sergeant Washington from a law firm in Atlanta, dated April 1955. It declined representation citing conflict of interest with existing clients. A third letter. Handwritten. From Thornton to someone named Judge Marcus Fielding. Dated May 1955. Marcus, we need to discuss the Washington situation. The colored veteran is being unreasonable. I trust you'll handle this with your usual discretion. Eve's hands went still. Kenzie appeared in the doorway. Mom, you okay? Get boxes, Eve said. We need to preserve these, every single one. They worked for 3 hours, carefully removing envelopes from the walls. Ray's crew found more hiding places, behind the bookshelf in the study, under the floorboards in the bedroom, inside a false bottom in the filing cabinet. By noon, they had 247 letters spread across the kitchen table, organized by date. The earliest was from 1952, the latest from 1985. 33 years of correspondence that Colonel Thomas Brennan had intercepted, copied, or hidden. A paper trail of something that shouldn't have been lost, but was. Eve sat down, started reading chronologically. The pattern emerged within the first 20 letters. William Thornton, Sr., patriarch of Millbrook's wealthiest family, had been systematically acquiring land from returning veterans. The method was sophisticated. Wait until a veteran bought farmland using their GI Bill benefits. Let them work it for a year or two, then approach with an offer. If the veteran declined, apply pressure. Property tax reassessments, zoning violations, bank loans suddenly called due, legal troubles that appeared from nowhere. Most sold. Those who didn't found themselves in court facing judges who were friends with Thornton, facing lawyers they couldn't afford to fight, facing a system that protected its own. The letters documented 15 separate instances, 15 families, 15 pieces of land that had belonged to men who'd served their country and been betrayed by it when they came home. Eve found one letter that made her pause, dated June 1955, from Samuel Washington to the Veterans Administration. Inspector General, I am writing to report systematic fraud targeting Negro veterans in Sumner County, Georgia. I have documented evidence of collusion between private landowners, local banks, and county officials to deprive veterans of their legal property rights. The letter was in a sealed envelope, stamped and addressed, never mailed. Clipped to it a note in her grandfather's handwriting. Samuel gave me this to mail. Said I was the only one he could trust. I couldn't do it. Not then. I had a family. I was afraid. God forgive me, I was afraid. But I kept it. Kept everything. Someone needs to know what happened here. Eve set the letter down, looked at the date again. 1955. Her grandfather would have been 29 years old, married. Her father would have been a baby. A mailman's job didn't pay much. The town was small. Everyone knew everyone. Speaking up meant losing everything. She understood the choice he'd made. Understood and hated it, and forgave it all at once. Kenzie was reading too. She held up a letter. Mom, look at this. It was a property deed. 200 acres of bottom land in the Riverside District. Samuel Washington's name on the original deed dated 1953. A second deed dated 1955 showing Thornton as owner. Purchase price $500. Market value according to a contemporary appraisal Eve found 3 letters later. $12,000. Highway robbery, Kenzie said. Worse, Eve said. Legal highway robbery. They kept reading. The letters painted a picture of a town where power protected power, where justice bent toward money, where men who'd fought for their country came home to find the same enemy wearing a different uniform. And through it all, one mailman quietly documenting everything, collecting evidence he didn't have the power to use, building a case for a prosecutor who didn't yet exist. Eve found herself thinking about her grandfather's study, the photograph on the corkboard, the day she told me she'd be a lawyer. Had he known even then, had he been waiting even then for her to grow up and become the person who could finish what he couldn't start? It was late afternoon when Eve found the envelope that changed everything. It was different from the others. Thicker paper, sealed with red wax, hidden in the deepest part of the wall behind a layer of plaster that Ray had to break with a hammer. The address was written in her grandfather's most careful handwriting. Prosecutor Evelyn Brennan, Esquire. No street address, no city, just her name and title. The postmark said December 1998. The month she'd passed the bar exam. Eve's hands shook as she broke the seal. Inside 3 pages in her grandfather's handwriting. dated December 15th, 1998. Dear Evelyn, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you found my secret. I'm sorry for the burden, but I knew from the time you were 7 years old that you'd be the one. You had that look, that fire, that need to make things right even when the world said to look away. I couldn't fight what happened in this town. I didn't have the education or the rank or the courage. But I could preserve the truth. I could build a case. I could wait for the day when someone with the power to act would ask the right questions. You're that someone, Evelyn. The letters tell the story. 15 families, 15 pieces of land, all taken through legal theft, all from men who served their country. William Thornton Sr. is dead now, but his son David runs the empire built on stolen ground. The Thornton building, the farms, the businesses, all of it sits on land that should have belonged to veterans and their children. I'm not asking you to destroy a family. I'm asking you to honor the men who were destroyed so that family could prosper. The law is your weapon. The truth is your ammunition. I spent 40 years collecting it. Now it's yours. Make them answer for what they did. With all my love and pride. Your grandfather, Colonel Thomas Brennan, USMC, retired. Eve read the letter 3 times, set it down, picked it up and read it again. 26 years ago, her grandfather had written this, had sealed it in wax, had hidden it in a wall, had trusted that someday, somehow, she'd find it. Kenzie read over her shoulder. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Kenzie said, "What are you gonna do?" Eve didn't answer immediately. She walked to the window, looked out at Magnolia Street, saw the Thornton building in the distance, glass and steel rising above the old downtown, saw Dorothy Vaughn's house across the street, saw the mailbox at the curb where her grandfather had started his route every morning for 40 years, saw a black Mercedes pull up to the curb. A man got out, late 60s, silver hair, expensive suit that didn't quite hide the military bearing underneath. He looked at the house, looked at the broken window with its cardboard patch, looked at Eve standing in the window looking back at him. He climbed the porch steps, knocked. Eve answered. Up close, the family resemblance was unmistakable. Same strong jaw as the photographs of William Thornton Sr. Same pale blue eyes. But there was something else. Something in the way he held himself. The way he met her gaze without flinching. "Ms. Brennan," he said, "my name is Garrett Thornton. I believe we need to talk." Eve didn't invite him in. She stepped onto the porch, pulled the door closed behind her. Whatever Garrett Thornton wanted to say, it would be said out here in the open, where Kenzie could see through the window. "I heard about the rock," Garrett said. "I want you to know that wasn't me. Wasn't anyone I know. But you know why someone did it." He didn't deny it. That told Eve everything she needed to know about the kind of man he was. No false outrage, no performative ignorance. Just the facts delivered straight. "My father bought this house 3 times, Garrett said. 1987, 1995, and 2003. Your grandfather said no every time. Last offer was $300,000, cash. And now Now I'm authorized to offer $500,000. That's well above market value for a house this size in this neighborhood. Eve looked at him, really looked. Saw the tailored suit that probably cost more than most Millbrook families made in a month. Saw the watch that could have paid for a new roof on every house on Magnolia Street. Saw the Mercedes at the curb with its leather interior and its pristine paint job. But she also saw the calluses on his hands. Saw the way he stood weight-balanced, shoulders square. Saw the small pin on his lapel. Army Combat Action Badge. "You served," Eve said. 22 years. Retired as Lieutenant Colonel. 101st Airborne. My husband was a Marine. Afghanistan. Something shifted in Garrett's face. Died 6 months ago. Car accident. I'm sorry. The words were simple but genuine. One veteran's spouse to another. The grief was different, but the understanding was the same. "Mr. Thornton," Eve said, "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not selling. May I ask why?" "Because someone doesn't want me to have this house. And I'm the kind of person who needs to know why." Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a business card, held it out. "My cell number's on the back," he said, "if you change your mind, or if you need anything while you're in town." Eve took the card. Their fingers didn't quite touch. "Your grandfather," Garrett said. "He saved my life once. 1971. I was 17. Stupid kid who thought he could handle his father's temper. Your grandfather found me behind the post office, bleeding from where the old man had knocked me into a wall. He didn't call the police. Didn't make a scene. Just drove me to the hospital, stayed until I was patched up. Then drove me home and told my father if it happened again, the next call would be to the state police." "Did it happen again?" "No. My father was a lot of things, but he wasn't stupid. Your grandfather had respect in this town, the kind you can't buy." Garrett paused. "I owed him. That's why I'm here, to repay a debt. By buying his house, by offering you a way out before this gets complicated. Mr. Thornton, I'm a federal prosecutor. Complicated is my job." He smiled. It was sad and knowing and somehow respectful all at once. "Then I'll say this once, and you can do with it what you will. My father was not a good man. He built an empire, yes. But he built it on land that should never have been his. Your grandfather knew it. I know it. And now you know it." He turned to leave, then stopped. "The difference is I don't know what to do about it. Maybe you will." He walked to his Mercedes, drove away, left Eve standing on the porch with a business card in her hand and more questions than answers. Inside, Kenzie was already on her laptop. "Who was that? The man who owns half this county? And who just offered us $500,000 to go away? Did you consider it?" For about 3 seconds. Kenzie grinned. "That's my mom." Eve sat down at the kitchen table. The letters were still spread out a paper map of injustice. She picked up her grandfather's letter again. Read the last line. "Make them answer for what they did." "Okay, Grandpa," she said quietly. "Let's do this right." The law office of Jameson Whitmore occupied the second floor of a building on Main Street. above a barber shop that looked like it hadn't changed since 1960. Eve climbed the stairs at 9 the next morning. The door was unlocked. Inside a reception area that had seen better days. Worn carpet. Filing cabinets that predated the internet. A desk with a nameplate that said, Carolyn Whitmore, office manager. And a woman who matched it somewhere in her 60s, reading glasses on a chain sensible shoes. Help you. I'm here to see Jameson Whitmore. I don't have an appointment. Nobody does. Jameson doesn't believe in appointments. Says they make people nervous. Carolyn looked Eve up and down. You're Tom Brennan's granddaughter. How did you know? Honey, this is Millbrook. I knew before you got out of your rental car. Jameson's expecting you. Go on back. The inner office was somehow worse and better than the reception area. Worse because the furniture looked like it had survived a war. Better because the walls were covered with photographs, military units, courtroom sketches, a framed law degree from Emory. And there in the corner, a photograph of a younger Jameson Whitmore in marine dress blues, shaking hands with another Marine. Eve recognized the second Marine. Her grandfather, Korea, a voice said behind her. 1951. We were at Chosin Reservoir together. Coldest I've ever been in my life before or since. Eve turned. Jameson Whitmore was 55, but looked older. The kind of older that comes from taking on fights you can't win and doing it anyway. Thin. Gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. Jeans and a button-down shirt. A scar running from his left ear to his collar. Shrapnel, he said, catching her looking. Chinese mortar round. Your grandfather carried me half a mile to the aid station. Saved my life. Then we lost touch for 40 years. And he walked into this office in 2010 and asked if I remembered him. Jameson smiled. Some things you don't forget. He never mentioned you. He wouldn't have. Tom didn't talk about the war. Not the way some men do. For him, it was just something that happened. You survived it or you didn't. He survived. Jameson gestured to a chair. Sit. Tell me why you're here. Eve told him. About the letters. About the patent. About her grandfather's documentation of 33 years of theft, disguised as legitimate business. Jameson listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. The springs creaked. I knew some of this, he said. Not all. Tom came to me in 2010, asked me to hold on to some documents. Said if anything happened to him, I should wait for you to show up. I told him he was being paranoid. He said paranoia kept him alive in Korea. Might as well keep him honest in Georgia. What documents? Jameson opened a file cabinet, pulled out a folder, set it on the desk between them. Copies, he said, of everything he had, plus some things he collected after you became a prosecutor. He wanted redundancy. Said the walls were good, but walls can burn. Eve opened the folder. Inside photocopies of the letters she'd found, plus others she hadn't, plus something new. A list, handwritten. 15 names. Beside each name, a property description, a date, and a current value estimate. At the bottom, a total $47,250,000. That's what the land is worth now, Jameson said, if you account for development appreciation and mineral rights. $47 million that should have gone to 15 families. Instead, it went to one. Eve studied the list, recognized some names: Washington, Fletcher, Kowalski, Martinez. Names that represented lives disrupted, futures stolen, justice denied. Can we get it back? Legally, maybe. The statute of limitations is a problem. Most of these transactions happened 50, 60 years ago. But there are precedents. Civil rights era land theft cases, wrongful taking claims. If we can prove systematic fraud, racial discrimination, and institutional collusion, we might have a shot. That's a lot of ifs. Yes, it is. Which is why we need witnesses, living witnesses, people who can testify to what happened. My grandfather's letter mentioned Samuel Washington, Delilah's father. Dead, 1990. What about Delilah herself? She'd be, Jameson calculated, 79 now. Last I heard, she was still alive, living over in Riverside County. Can you reach her? Jameson picked up his phone, dialed from memory, waited. Then his face changed. Delilah, it's Jameson Whitmore. Yes, ma'am, I know it's been a while. Listen, I've got someone here you need to meet. Tom Brennan's granddaughter. A pause. Yes, ma'am, she found them. All of them. He handed Eve the phone. Hello, Eve said. The voice on the other end was strong, clear. The voice of someone who'd spent 79 years refusing to break. My father died believing nobody cared what happened to us, Delilah Washington said. Died thinking the world forgot. You telling me I can prove him wrong? Yes, ma'am. I think I am. Then you come see me. Tomorrow. I'll make lunch. Eve spent the rest of the day with Kenzie in Jameson's office going through the documents, building timelines, cross-referencing deeds and tax records and court filings. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. William Thornton Sr. hadn't worked alone. He'd had help. Judge Marcus Fielding, who presided over every property dispute in Sumner County from 1952 to 1978. Every single case went Thornton's way. Harold Westbrook, president of Millbrook Savings and Loan from 1950 to 1985. Every veteran who fought the land sales found their loans called in, their credit destroyed. And the one that made Eve's hands shake, Richard Aldrich V, a regional director from 1972 to 1980. Current United States Senator from Georgia. Kenzie found the smoking gun in a folder marked Correspondence Official. A letter from Samuel Washington to the VA Inspector General, dated June 1975. Detailed, specific, naming names, providing addresses, including copies of deeds and appraisals and threatening letters. The kind of letter that should have triggered an investigation. Clipped to it a response from the IG's office, dated August 1975. Your complaint has been reviewed and found to lack sufficient evidence to warrant further investigation. This matter is considered closed. Signed by Richard Aldrich, Regional Director. He buried it, Kenzie said. He received a complaint about systematic fraud targeting veterans, and he buried it. Eve looked at the dates again. 1975. Aldrich would have been 31 years old. Young, ambitious, already making the connections that would carry him through a VA career and into politics. We need to find the other families, Eve said. The other names on this list. Someone has to still be alive. Jameson made calls, used his network, veterans organizations, church groups, old courthouse connections. By evening, they had located 8 of the 15 families, or rather, located descendants. Most of the original victims were dead, but their children and grandchildren were alive, and they remembered. One name on the list stood out: Harrison Fletcher. Fletcher had owned 150 acres of prime farmland in the Riverside district. Lost it in 1978 after challenging Thornton in court. According to the records, Fletcher had disappeared shortly after losing the case. No death certificate, no forwarding address, just gone. "I remember this one," Jameson said. Fletcher was a combat engineer, served in the late 60s, came back, used his GI Bill to buy land, was going to start a tree farm. Then Thornton wanted the land for a development. Fletcher fought hard, had evidence, witnesses, should have won, but didn't. Judge Fielding ruled against him. 3 days later, Fletcher's barn burned down. Week after that, someone shot at his house. Month later, he was gone. Town figured Thornton scared him off. Or worse. There was talk, just talk, about a body in the quarry. State police came through, didn't find anything. Case went cold. Eve stared at Fletcher's name. What if he's not dead? After 46 years, he'd be 75 now. If he ran, he could be anywhere. Or he could be somewhere findable, if we know how to look. Kenzie was already on her laptop. What's his full name? Harrison Charles Fletcher. Born 1949, served 1967 to 1971. Kenzie's fingers flew across the keyboard. Database searches, veterans records, Social Security Administration. Nothing came up under Harrison Fletcher after 1978. But then she tried something else. Changed the parameters, searched for similar names, similar ages, similar service records, and found something. Henry Charles Freeman, Kenzie said. Born 1949, lives in San Francisco, worked as a civil engineer for 30 years. Retired 2014. No military service listed in any public records, but she clicked through screens. He has a son, Theodore Freeman, age 50. Investigative journalist for the Chronicle. Specializes in land rights issues and veterans affairs. Eve felt something click into place. That's him. You can't know that for sure. Harrison to Henry. Fletcher to Freeman. Charles stays the same. Combat engineer becomes civil engineer. It's him. It has to be. Jameson looked skeptical. Even if it is, how do you get him to talk? Man's been hiding for 46 years. He's not going to just come out because you ask nicely. No, Eve said, but he might come out for the truth. She called the San Francisco Chronicle, asked for Theodore Freeman, got his voicemail, left a message. Mr. Freeman, my name is Evelyn Brennan. I'm a federal prosecutor in Atlanta. I'm investigating a case involving systematic land theft from veterans in Georgia between 1952 and 1985. I believe your father was a victim. I have evidence. I need to speak with him. Please call me back. She left her number, hung up. Now what? Kenzie asked. Now we wait. They didn't have to wait long. Theodore Freeman called back 30 minutes later. How did you find him? No introduction, no pleasantries. Just the question. Public records, pattern matching, a hunch. And what makes you think the man you found is my father? Because a combat engineer named Harrison Fletcher disappeared from Millbrook, Georgia in 1978, and a civil engineer named Henry Freeman appeared in San Francisco the same year. Because Harrison had evidence of land fraud, and Henry spent 30 years working on civil rights cases pro bono. Because running from Georgia to San Francisco is exactly what someone would do if they were afraid for their life. Silence on the other end. Then, what do you want? I want justice for 15 families, including yours. I have documentation, letters, evidence my grandfather spent 33 years collecting. But I need witnesses. I need someone who was there, who saw it happen, who can testify. He'll never come back to Georgia. Then I'll come to him. Another pause, longer this time. I'll talk to him, Theo said. No promises, but I'll talk to him. That's all I ask. 2 days later, Eve and Kenzie were on a plane to San Francisco. Theo Freeman met them at a coffee shop in the Mission District. He was 50, lean with the cautious eyes of someone who'd spent a career investigating things people wanted to keep hidden. He agreed to meet you, Theo said without preamble, but not at his house, not anywhere public. And I'm coming with you. Where? Golden Gate Park, by the bison paddock, noon tomorrow. The next day, Eve and Kenzie walked through Golden Gate Park, found the bison paddock, saw an old man sitting on a bench feeding pigeons. Theo stood nearby, arms crossed, watching. The old man looked up as they approached. His face was weathered, deeply lined, but his eyes were sharp, alert. The eyes of someone who'd spent 46 years looking over his shoulder. Harrison Fletcher, Eve said quietly. That name's dead, he said. Has been since 1978. Then I'll call you Mr. Freeman. I'm Evelyn Brennan. This is my daughter Mackenzie. I know who you are. Theo showed me the articles. Federal prosecutor. Marine veteran's widow. Tom Brennan's granddaughter. He scattered more seed for the pigeons. Tom was a good man. Only one in that whole town who tried to help. He documented everything. Saved every letter, every deed, every piece of evidence. And what good did it do? Thornton still won. Judge still ruled against me. My barn still burned. They still shot at my house with my wife and son inside. His hands shook slightly. I had a choice. Stay and die or run and live. I chose to live. I don't blame you for that. Don't you? Because I blame myself for 46 years. I had evidence. I had witnesses. I could have fought, could have made them answer. Instead, I ran. Eve sat down on the bench beside him. Mr. Freeman, my grandfather, wrote me a letter before he died. He said he didn't have the education or the rank or the courage to fight what happened, but he could preserve the truth. He spent his whole life building a case, waiting for someone who could use it. And that's you. That's me. But I need witnesses. I need someone who can stand up in court and say, this happened to me. This is what they did. This is what they took. Harrison was quiet for a long time, watching the bison, watching the pigeons, watching anything except Eve's face. "I'm 75 years old," he said finally. "I built a new life, new name, new career. My son doesn't even know the whole story. What you're asking, it means giving all that up. I know. It means going back to a place I swore I'd never see again. I know that too. It means testifying against people who are still powerful, still dangerous. Yes." Harrison turned to look at her. "Why should I trust you?" "Because Tom Brennan trusted me, and he was the only one who helped you when no one else would." Something in Harrison's face cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. "What exactly did Tom save?" Eve opened her briefcase, pulled out a folder. Inside, copies of everything related to Harrison's case. The original deed showing his purchase of 150 acres. The appraisals. The court filings. Judge Fielding's ruling. The threatening letters. And one more thing. A recording. On an old cassette tape. "Tom gave you this," Eve said, holding up the tape. Harrison's eyes went wide. "I thought that was lost. Thought they destroyed it." "What is it?" "Insurance," Harrison said. "Tom gave me a wire recorder in 1977. Said if Thornton tried anything, I should record it. Get him on tape. I did. Got him and the judge and the bank president. Got them planning the whole thing. How they'd rule against me. How they'd burn my barn. How they'd run me off. And then I gave the original to Tom. Kept a copy for myself. When they burned the barn, I knew the copy wasn't safe. Threw it in the fire. Figured the original was gone too. Tom kept it, along with everything else." Harrison took the cassette with shaking hands. "This is him. This is Thornton admitting everything. Will you testify?" Harrison looked at his son. Theo nodded. Some silent communication passed between them. "Yeah," Harrison said. "Yeah, I'll testify. Been running for 46 years. Maybe it's time I stood still." They talked for another hour. Harrison told his story. The farm he'd dreamed of. The trees he'd planned to plant. The life he'd built and lost and built again. Theo recorded everything on his phone. Evidence for the case that was building. Before they left, Harrison said one more thing. "There were others, other families, some I knew, some I just heard about. Black families mostly, a Jewish family, couple of Hispanic vets. We tried to organize, tried to fight together. But Thornton was smart. He picked us off one by one, and the ones who stayed quiet got to keep their land. The ones who fought lost everything. Do you remember names? Some, not all, but there's one you should know about. Marcus Kowalski, Polish immigrant, World War II vet. Had a small farm outside town. Thornton wanted it for a factory site. Marcus fought hard. This was early. 1956, maybe 57. Before Thornton had the system perfected. What happened? Marcus won. Actually won. Got a judge from another county. Ruled in his favor. Kept his land. So he succeeded. Harrison's face went dark. for about 3 months. Then his barn burned down while he was in it. Fire department said it was an accident. Nobody believed it, but nobody could prove different. Eve felt cold despite the California sun. Murder. I can't prove it. But Tom thought so. Said there was evidence. Said the fire chief knew. Said a lot of people knew, but nobody would talk. Is the fire chief still alive? Dead. 10 years ago. Heart attack. And the Kowalski family. Marcus had a son, Daniel. He'd be in his 70s now. Last I heard, he was living somewhere in the Midwest. Michigan, maybe. Or Wisconsin. Somewhere cold. Somewhere far from Georgia. Eve made a note. Another name. Another lead. Another piece of the puzzle. They flew back to Atlanta the next day. Harrison and Theo were booked on a flight 3 days later. Harrison wanted time to prepare, to tell friends, to say goodbye to the life he'd built as Henry Freeman. Back in Millbrook, Eve and Jameson regrouped. The case was coming together. 15 families, 8 with living descendants they'd located. Harrison Fletcher willing to testify. Recordings, documents, a pattern of fraud spanning 3 decades. But they needed more. Jameson made a suggestion. VFW Post 447. Your grandfather was a member for 50 years. Commander's a man named Bill Holloway. Served in Desert Storm. Runs the place like a museum. If Tom left anything else, Bill would know. They drove to the VFW hall the next morning. A squat brick building at the edge of town. American flag out front parking lot full of pickup trucks. Inside, the walls were covered with photographs, units, battles. Men who'd served and died. Men who'd served and lived. A memorial wall with names etched in brass. Bill Holloway was 65, barrel-chested, with a handshake that could crack walnuts. "You're Tom's granddaughter," he said. Not a question. "Yes, sir. He talked about you. Said you were going to do something important someday." Bill gestured to a back room. "Come on. There's something you need to see." The back room was a combination office and storage area. File cabinets, boxes, a safe built into the wall. Bill opened the safe. Inside, a metal box. He pulled it out, set it on the desk. "Tom gave me this in 2010, Bill said. Said to keep it until you came asking. Said you'd know when the time was right." Eve opened the box. Inside, more letters, more documents, and something else. A ledger. Handwritten. Every transaction Thornton had made from 1952 to 1985. Every piece of land. Every family. Every dollar amount. Every person involved. He tracked everything, Eve said softly. "More than that," Bill said. He pulled out another folder from the safe. "Tom wrote this in 2012. Called it his testimony. Said if he died before you could use the evidence, this would speak for him." Eve opened the folder. Inside, 15 pages in her grandfather's handwriting. A statement. Witnessing. Documenting. Explaining why he'd kept the evidence. Why he'd waited. Why he believed justice could still be done. The last paragraph made her throat tight. "I failed these men in life. I was afraid when I should have been brave. I was silent when I should have spoken. But I refused to fail them in death. This evidence is my witness. My granddaughter is my voice, and together they will make the guilty answer for what they did to men who deserved better from their country. Eve set the pages down, looked at Bill Holloway. Did he ever tell you why he didn't do something sooner? He told me once. Said he made a choice between protecting his family and protecting the truth. Chose family. Spent the rest of his life trying to protect both. Bill paused. Said the only way to do that was to wait for someone who had the power he never had. Someone who could fight without losing everything. Someone like you. That evening, back at the house on Magnolia Street, Eve sat at the kitchen table with all the evidence spread out. Letters, deeds, recordings, testimony. A case 50 years in the making. Kenzie was on her laptop researching, building databases, creating timelines. "Mom," she said suddenly, "I found something." "What?" Senator Aldrich, the VA director who buried the Inspector General complaint in 1975. He's not just any senator. He's chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. Eve felt something cold settle in her stomach. He's in charge of veteran oversight. Has been for 6 years. And get this, he's up for re-election next year. His campaign already has $15 million in the bank. Guess who the largest contributor is? Thornton Properties. Thornton Properties. Thornton Development. Thornton Agricultural Holdings. The whole empire. They've given him $2.3 million over the last decade. Eve stared at the screen. The connections were clear. Aldrich had buried the investigation in 1975 to protect Thornton. Thornton had rewarded him with money and support. Aldrich had used that support to build a political career. And now he sat in a position where he could continue to protect the very crimes he'd helped cover up. "This is bigger than I thought," Eve said. "Ooh, yeah, this isn't just about land. It's about corruption at the federal level. You go after this, you're going after a sitting U.S. senator." Eve thought about her grandfather, about Harrison Fletcher, about Samuel Washington and Marcus Kowalski, and all the others whose names were on that list. She thought about her husband Daniel, who'd served his country and died without ever knowing his own government, had betrayed veterans decades before he was born. She thought about the oath she'd taken as a prosecutor, to seek justice, to uphold the law, to protect the innocent and punish the guilty, no matter who they were. "Get me Jameson on the phone," Eve said. "We need to talk about filing a federal civil rights lawsuit." The next morning, there was another rock through the window. This time, it came with a different message. "Your husband died easy. You won't." Eve stood in the living room looking at the rock, the broken glass, the threat written in block letters on paper that could never be traced. Kenzie came running from the bedroom, saw the message, went pale. "Mom, we need to call the police. This is a death threat." "No." "What do you mean, no?" "I mean we don't call the police. We don't give them the satisfaction of knowing they got to us." "Mom, this is serious. They're threatening to kill you." Eve picked up the rock, felt the weight of it, the solidity. Someone had thrown this through her window. Someone had written those words. Someone was scared enough of what she might find to try to scare her into stopping. That meant she was close. "I spent 7 years in the Marine JAG Corps," Eve said quietly. 3 tours prosecuting cases in war zones. I've been threatened by terrorists, by warlords, by men who would have killed me without blinking if they thought they could get away with it. I'm not stopping because someone throws a rock. This isn't a war zone. This is Georgia. Kenzie, 15 families lost everything because people with power decided they could take what they wanted and face no consequences. My grandfather spent his entire life documenting that theft. He trusted me to finish what he started. I'm not walking away." Kenzie looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, then what do we do?" "We call Jameson. We file the lawsuit, and we make them answer for what they did." But before Eve could reach for her phone, it rang. Unknown number. She answered. "Evelyn Brennan." "Ms. Brennan, this is Garrett Thornton. I heard about the rock, about the threat. I need you to know that wasn't from me or anyone in my organization." "Then who?" "I don't know. But I'm going to find out. In the meantime, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you the first day we met." "I'm listening." A pause. The sound of breathing. The sound of a decision being made. "My father kept journals," Garrett said. "Detailed records of every business deal he ever made. I found them after he died. I've known for 15 years exactly what he did to those families. I've known, and I did nothing. Why are you telling me this now? Because my son is deployed, Army captain, somewhere in the Middle East. I can't tell you where. And yesterday he called me. Said he'd been thinking about family legacy, about what it means to serve your country, about honor." Another pause. "He doesn't know, Miss Brennan. Doesn't know his grandfather was a thief. Doesn't know the family fortune was built on stolen land. Doesn't know his father knew and stayed silent. When he comes home, he's going to ask questions. And I realized I can't lie to him anymore." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'll testify. I'll provide the journals. I'll give you everything I have. But I have one condition." "What?" "You let me tell my son first, face to face, before it becomes public. He deserves that much." Eve thought about it. About Garrett's position. About his son in a war zone fighting for a country that was built on ideals people like his grandfather had betrayed. "How long?" 3 weeks. He rotates home in 3 weeks. We file the lawsuit in 1 week. Your testimony comes after. Deal." "Deal." He hung up. Eve stood there holding the phone, realizing what had just happened. The man whose family had built an empire on theft was going to help destroy it. Because his son was a soldier and soldiers were supposed to believe in honor. It was the kind of thing her grandfather would have understood. The lawsuit was filed on a Tuesday morning in the Federal District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. Jameson Whitmore stood on the courthouse steps, with Eve and Kenzie beside him, reading a prepared statement to 3 local reporters and 1 camera crew from Atlanta. "Today we file a civil rights action on behalf of 15 families whose land was systematically stolen between 1952 and 1985. through a coordinated pattern of fraud, racial discrimination, and institutional corruption. The defendants are Thornton Properties and its subsidiaries, as well as several individuals who participated in or enabled these crimes. The reporters asked questions. Jameson answered them. Professional, measured, giving nothing away that wasn't already in the public filing. But Eve knew what wasn't being said, knew the name that would come later when the evidence was presented. Senator Richard Aldrich, chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, the man who'd buried the truth 49 years ago. They drove back to Millbrook in silence. The real work was just beginning. Discovery would take months. Depositions, document production, motions, the grinding machinery of federal litigation. But Jameson had been right about one thing. The evidence was overwhelming. And overwhelming evidence had a way of changing people's calculations about what was worth fighting. The call came 3 days later. Thornton Properties wanted to settle. Eve met with their lawyers in a conference room in Atlanta. 5 attorneys in expensive suits, representing a corporation that had spent 70 years building wealth on stolen land. The lead attorney was a woman named Patricia Carlisle, Yale Law, 20 years at one of the biggest firms in the Southeast. The kind of lawyer who didn't lose. "My clients are prepared to make a substantial offer," Patricia said. $10 million split among the 15 families, in exchange for a full release of all claims and a confidentiality agreement. Eve didn't blink. $47 million, based on current land values. No confidentiality agreement. Public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. And your clients cooperate fully with any federal investigation into Senator Aldrich's role in covering up the original VA complaint. Patricia's expression didn't change. "That's not realistic." "Then we'll see you in court." Eve stood up. Jameson followed. They walked out, leaving 5 lawyers sitting at a conference table with an offer that had just been rejected. In the elevator, Jameson smiled. "You know they'll be back." "I know. And you know 10 million is more than most of these families have ever seen. I also know it's less than what they're owed. We're not settling for half measures." They were back in 3 days. This time the offer was 20 million. Same terms. Eve said no. The depositions began. Jameson took them. Eve sat in. One by one, the people who'd looked the other way, who'd enabled the theft, who'd profited from it, sat in windowless rooms and answered questions under oath. Bank presidents who'd called in loans on schedule. County clerks who'd processed fraudulent deeds. Lawyers who'd represented Thornton in court after court, winning case after case against veterans who couldn't afford to fight. Some of them were old now, retired, living on pensions and Social Security. They thought they'd gotten away with it, thought the past was buried. They were wrong. The break came from an unexpected source. Judge Marcus Fielding had died in 2003, but his son was alive. Gregory Fielding, 68, retired school principal living in Athens. He agreed to meet with Eve and Jameson at a coffee shop near the university. "I found my father's papers after he died," Gregory said. He was thin, gray-haired with the careful manner of someone who'd spent a lifetime teaching children to tell the truth. He kept everything, every case, every ruling, every piece of correspondence with William Thornton. "Why are you telling us this?" Because I spent 40 years being proud of my father, the judge, the pillar of the community. Then I read what he'd actually done, how he'd ruled against veterans who had the law on their side, how he'd taken money from Thornton, cash payments, envelopes handed over at the country club. Gregory's hands shook slightly. I can't bring him back to face justice, but I can give you what you need to get it without him. He slid a banker's box across the table. It's all in there. Letters, financial records, case notes where he wrote down exactly why he was ruling against the plaintiff, and it wasn't because of the law. It was because Thornton paid him to. Eve opened the box. Inside, precisely what Gregory had promised. Evidence of corruption so blatant it was almost shocking in its casualness, as if Judge Fielding had never imagined anyone would see these papers. Never imagined he'd have to answer for what he'd done. "Thank you," Eve said quietly. "Don't thank me. Just make sure people know. Make sure the families know their fathers weren't wrong. The system was." With Gregory Fielding's evidence, the case became unwinnable for the defense. Jameson filed a motion for summary judgment on liability. The only question left was damages. The trial was set for May. Harrison Fletcher flew in 2 weeks before trial. Theo came with him. Eve met them at the airport, drove them to a hotel in Atlanta. Harrison had insisted on staying away from Millbrook until he absolutely had to go back. 46 years, he said, looking out the car window at the Georgia landscape rolling by. And it still feels like yesterday. The fear, the running, the looking over my shoulder. "You don't have to testify if you're not ready," Eve said. "I'm not ready, but I'm doing it anyway. Tom Brennan gave me a chance to hide the evidence, kept it safe all these years. Least I can do is stand up and say what happened." They spent a week preparing, going over his testimony, reviewing the documents, practicing for cross-examination. Harrison was a good witness, clear, precise. The engineer in him came through. He dealt in facts, not emotions. But when he talked about the night his barn burned, about his wife crying about his young son asking why they had to leave, the emotion was there, controlled but present. Delilah Washington arrived 3 days before trial. She was 79 but could have passed for 60, sharp as a blade. She'd brought her father's Purple Heart in a velvet case, brought his discharge papers, brought photographs of the land before Thornton took it. "My father died believing he'd failed us," Delilah said. "Died thinking he should have fought harder, should have been smarter, should have been something other than what he was, which was a good man who served his country and expected his country to serve him back." She looked at Eve with eyes that had seen too much injustice and refused to look away. "You make them answer for what they did to him. You make them say his name and admit what they took. That's all I want. Justice doesn't bring him back, but it says he mattered." Trial began on a Monday morning in May. Federal courthouse in Atlanta. Judge Sarah Morrison presiding. A black woman, 62, appointed by Obama, with a reputation for running a tight courtroom and zero tolerance for nonsense. The gallery was packed. Descendants of the 15 families, veterans from VFW Post 447, reporters, legal observers, people who'd heard about the case and wanted to see justice done. Garrett Thornton sat in the back row, alone. His son had come home the week before. They'd had the conversation Garrett had dreaded for 15 years. What happened after, Garrett hadn't said. But he was here. That meant something. Jameson gave the opening statement, laid out the case with military precision. 15 families, systematic fraud, racial discrimination, institutional corruption, a pattern spanning 3 decades enabled by people in positions of trust, resulting in the theft of land worth $47 million at current values. This case is about honor, Jameson said, about men who served their country in war and were betrayed by it in peace, about a system that protected the powerful and abandoned the powerless, about one mailman who couldn't fight the injustice but refused to let it be forgotten, and about his granddaughter who inherited not just his evidence but his obligation. The obligation to make the guilty answer for what they did. The defense attorney gave a different opening. Talked about statute of limitations. Talked about legitimate business transactions. Talked about how you can't judge the past by present standards. Judge Morrison listened to both, then said, "Call your first witness." Eve took the stand first, established the foundation, testified about finding the letters, about her grandfather's documentation, about the pattern she'd discovered, about the evidence that had been hidden in the walls for decades waiting for someone who could use it. The defense tried to paint her as biased, as someone with an emotional investment in the outcome, as someone who was using her position as a federal prosecutor to pursue a personal vendetta. Eve looked the attorney in the eye. "My grandfather was a mailman. He delivered letters for 40 years. He saw something wrong and documented it because that's what honorable men do when they can't stop injustice. They preserve the truth. I'm a prosecutor. I spent 7 years in military courts and 15 years in federal courts. I see evidence of crimes and I prosecute them. That's not a vendetta. That's my job." Harrison Fletcher testified next, told the story of his farm, his dreams, his fight against Thornton, told about the threats, the burning barn, the shots fired at his house, the decision to run rather than die. The defense attorney tried to shake him, asked why he'd waited 46 years to come forward, asked if he was doing this for money. Harrison looked at the attorney with the flat expression of a man who'd survived worse than cross-examination. "I waited because I was afraid. Afraid they'd finish what they started. Afraid my family would pay the price for my testimony. But I'm 75 years old now. My wife passed 2 years ago. My son's grown. I got nothing left to lose except my self-respect. And I won't lose that by staying silent anymore." Delilah Washington brought the courtroom to silence. She walked to the witness stand with her father's Purple Heart in her hand, placed it on the rail in front of her, looked at the defense table, at the judge, at the gallery full of people waiting to hear her speak. "My father was Sergeant Samuel Washington," she said. "He served in Korea. Earned this medal when he pulled 3 wounded Marines from a burning vehicle under enemy fire. Came home in 1953. Used his GI Bill to buy 200 acres of good bottomland. Built a house. Planted crops. Was going to leave something for his children." She paused. The courtroom was absolutely still. William Thornton took that from him. Not with a gun, with a judge who'd been paid off, with a bank that called his loan, with a system that looked at a black veteran and saw someone who could be robbed without consequence. And my father died in 1990, 73 years old. Never owned land again. Never stopped talking about those 200 acres. About what it meant to have something that was his. Something he'd earned. Something nobody could take away. Delilah picked up the Purple Heart. Except they did take it away. And when my father died, this medal was the only thing of value he had to leave me. Not land, not wealth, not security. Just this. A piece of metal that said he'd been brave once when his country needed him to be. She looked directly at the defense attorney. You ask if this is about money. It's not. It's about saying my father mattered. About saying what was done to him was wrong. About making the people who profited from that wrong admit what they did. When she finished, there wasn't a sound in the courtroom. Judge Morrison called a recess. Eve saw more than one person in the gallery wiping their eyes. The trial continued for 2 weeks. Witness after witness, document after document, the story emerging in pieces until the whole ugly picture was clear. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Garrett Thornton took the stand. He'd been sworn in as a defense witness initially. His own company's lawyers had called him to testify about his father's business practices, expecting him to defend the family legacy. Instead, he destroyed it. My father was a thief, Garrett said. His voice was steady, clear. The voice of a man who'd made peace with what he was about to do. He stole land from veterans who'd served their country. He used judges and bankers and lawyers to make that theft legal. He built an empire on what he took from men who deserved better. The defense attorney tried to object. Judge Morrison overruled. The witness may continue. I found my father's journals after he died in 2009, Garrett said. Detailed records of every transaction, every payment to judges, every threatened lawsuit, every barn that mysteriously burned. He was proud of what he'd done. Wrote it all down, like he was documenting a military campaign. Garrett produced the journals, thick leather-bound books filled with William Thornton Sr.'s handwriting. The defense table went pale. I've known about this for 15 years, Garrett continued. Known what my father did. Known the family fortune was built on stolen land. And I did nothing. I told myself the past was past, that I couldn't change what had happened, that protecting the family name was more important than truth. What changed? Jameson asked. My son came home from deployment. He's an Army captain. Serves because he believes in honor, in duty, in doing the right thing even when it costs you. Garrett's voice roughened slightly. He asked me what kind of man his grandfather was, and I realized I couldn't lie to him. Couldn't let him believe the family legacy was something to be proud of when it was built on shame. He looked at the gallery, at Delilah Washington, at Harrison Fletcher, at the descendants of the 15 families. I'm sorry, he said. I know that's not enough. I know sorry doesn't give back what was taken. But I'm sorry, and I'm here to testify that everything in these documents is true. My father was a thief. Judge Fielding was corrupt. The bank president was complicit. And Senator Richard Aldrich buried the investigation that could have stopped it in 1975. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison gavelled for order. The defense attorneys huddled, whispering urgently. Garrett wasn't finished. I'm also here to say that Thornton Properties, which I control, will not fight this lawsuit. We will settle for the full amount of damages based on current land values, $47 million. And we will cooperate fully with any federal investigation into Senator Aldrich's role in the cover-up. The gallery erupted again. This time, Judge Morrison let it go for a moment before restoring order. After Garrett stepped down, Jameson approached the bench. Your Honor, in light of Mr. Thornton's testimony, we'd like to introduce one final piece of evidence. Proceed. Jameson held up an envelope. This is a letter written by Colonel Thomas Brennan in 1998. It was sealed in wax and hidden in the wall of his house with instructions that it be opened only by his granddaughter, Prosecutor Evelyn Brennan, after his death. He handed it to Eve. She stood, walked to the witness stand, broke the seal she'd already broken weeks ago, read aloud the letter her grandfather had written 26 years before his death. When she reached the final paragraph, her voice didn't waver. I failed these men in life. I was afraid when I should have been brave. I was silent when I should have spoken, but I refused to fail them in death. This evidence is my witness. My granddaughter is my voice, and together they will make the guilty answer for what they did to men who deserve better from their country. And she looked up, met the judge's eyes. Your Honor, my grandfather spent 33 years building this case. He knew he'd never see justice done. But he believed someone would. He believed in the law, in the system, in the idea that truth, if preserved long enough, would eventually matter. She held up the letter. He was right. Truth does matter. These families matter. And today we make the guilty answer. Judge Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. This court will recess for 24 hours. During that time, the parties will negotiate a settlement. Based on the evidence presented, I strongly suggest the defense consider Mr. Thornton's offer seriously. Court is adjourned. The settlement was finalized 2 days later. $47 million to be distributed among the 15 families based on the value of land taken. An additional $3 million to establish the Colonel Thomas Brennan Veterans Justice Fund, administered by the VFW, to provide legal assistance to veterans facing property disputes. The Thornton Foundation, which had operated for 50 years funding hospitals and libraries and scholarships, would be dissolved. Its remaining assets, approximately $20 million, would be transferred to the new fund. Thornton Properties issued a public statement acknowledging historical wrongs and committing to restorative justice for the families harmed by the actions of William Thornton Sr. and Senator Richard Aldrich, facing a federal investigation into his role in burying the 1975 VA Inspector General complaint, announced his resignation, effective immediately. He released a statement saying he was stepping down to focus on personal matters and to cooperate fully with ongoing investigations. The FBI opened a case. Federal prosecutors in Washington started reviewing documents. The story made national news. CNN, MSNBC, Fox. The New York Times ran a front-page feature. Hidden letters expose 30-year land theft from veterans. But for Eve, the real moment came 3 weeks later on a Saturday morning at VFW Post 447. The dedication ceremony was small, just the families, the VFW members, local press, no crowds, no politicians, no cameras except the local newspaper. Bill Holloway, the VFW commander, stood at a podium in front of a new memorial wall. Bronze plaques listing the names of the 15 families, their service records, the land they'd lost, and the year of restoration. At the top, a larger plaque. Colonel Thomas Brennan, USMC, retired 1926 to 2024 mailman, veteran, guardian of truth. He preserved what he could not protect and trusted that justice, though delayed, would come. Delilah Washington unveiled the memorial, her hands steady as she pulled away the cloth. Harrison Fletcher stood beside her. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Garrett Thornton was there too, standing in the back. He'd wanted to speak to apologize publicly. Bill Holloway had told him no. This ceremony was for the families, for the veterans, for the man who documented the truth. But afterward, Delilah approached Garrett, looked at him for a long moment. "Your father took my father's land," she said. "Took his dreams, took his legacy. You can't give that back." "I know. But you told the truth. That counts for something." She held out her hand. "Thank you." Garrett took it, shook once. Then Delilah walked away back to her family, back to the people who mattered. Eve watched from the steps of the VFW hall. Kenzie stood beside her. "You did it," Kenzie said. "Grandpa did it. I just finished it. He'd be proud." "I hope so." That evening, Eve drove to the cemetery, found her grandfather's grave. The headstone was simple. Name, rank, dates, bronze star and purple heart engraved beneath. She sat down on the grass beside it, told him everything. About the trial, about Garrett's testimony, about the settlement, about the memorial. "You were right," she said to the headstone. "Truth does matter. Justice does come. Sometimes it takes 50 years, but it comes." She placed a letter on the grave, the one he'd written to her in 1998, the one that had started everything. "I'm keeping the house," she told him, "turning it into an archive, a place where people can come and see the evidence, learn the history, understand what happened here and why it can't happen again." The sun was setting, long shadows across the cemetery. Eve stood up, looked at the rows of veterans' graves stretching in both directions. Men and women who'd served, who'd trusted their country to honor that service. Most of them had been honored. Some hadn't, but all of them mattered. She walked back to her car, drove to Magnolia Street. The house looked different now. Not empty, not sad, just waiting. Inside, Kenzie was working on her laptop, setting up the website for what they were calling the Brennan Veterans Truth Archive. A digital repository of all the documents, all the letters, all the evidence, available to researchers, historians, lawyers working on similar cases. "Got an email," Kenzie said, "from a woman in Tennessee. Says her grandfather was a veteran. Says he lost his farm in the 1960s under suspicious circumstances. Says she found letters hidden in her attic. Wants to know if we can help." Eve sat down, read the email, felt something settle into place. Her grandfather had documented one conspiracy, in one town over 33 years. But if it happened in Millbrook, it had happened elsewhere. Other towns, other veterans, other families who'd been robbed and silenced. And now they had a template, a roadmap, a way to fight back. "Tell her yes," Eve said. "We can help." The Colonel Thomas Brennan Veterans Justice Fund opened its doors 6 months later. Housed in the old Brennan House on Magnolia Street, now fully renovated, the walls opened up and preserved behind glass. Visitors could see where the letters had been hidden. See the actual envelopes, the documents, the evidence that had waited decades to be found. Eve took a leave of absence from the U.S. Attorney's Office, stayed in Millbrook, ran the fund with Kenzie, who turned down jobs at big Atlanta firms to do this instead. Harrison Fletcher became their first consultant, using his engineering background to help analyze property records, find the patterns, build the cases. Jameson Whitmore joined as legal director, 60 years old and finally doing the work he'd been meant to do all along. They took on 12 cases in the first year. Veterans' families from across the South. Similar patterns, similar methods. The same playbook that Thornton had used repeated in dozens of towns by dozens of powerful families who thought the past was buried. But the past had a way of surfacing when someone knew how to look. One year after the trial on the anniversary of Colonel Brennan's death, they held a remembrance ceremony. Not just for him, but for all the veterans who'd been wronged, all the families who'd lost land, all the people who'd waited for justice. A young Marine showed up, 23, just back from his first deployment. He brought his daughter, maybe 5 years old, in a red dress and pigtails. "I heard about this place," he said to Eve. "Heard about what your grandfather did. I wanted my daughter to see it, to know that one person can make a difference, even if it takes 50 years. Eve walked him through the archive, showed him the letters, the documents, the memorial wall with the names. The little girl looked up at her father. Was he a hero? The Marine looked at Colonel Brennan's photograph. An old man in his mailman's uniform holding up a letter like it mattered. "Yes, sweetheart. He was a hero. The kind who didn't carry a gun or win medals. The kind who just did the right thing every day, even when nobody was watching." Eve felt her throat tighten, heard her grandfather's voice in her head, the same voice that had read to her when she was 7. That had told her she'd be a lawyer someday. That had believed in justice, even when justice seemed impossible. "Thank you for serving," Eve said to the Marine. "Thank you for this," he said, gesturing to the archive. "For making sure we remember." After they left, Eve stood alone in the room that had once been her grandfather's study. The corkboard was still there. The photographs. But now, there were more. The 15 families reunited with their land, or compensated for what they'd lost. Harrison Fletcher standing in front of his old property, tears streaming down his face. Delilah Washington holding her father's Purple Heart at the memorial dedication. And one new photograph. Eve and Kenzie on the courthouse steps the day the settlement was announced. Behind them, barely visible, Garrett Thornton, a man who'd chosen truth over legacy, justice over family loyalty. Eve's phone buzzed. Email notification. Another case. Another family. Another veteran whose land had been stolen, whose story had been buried, whose justice had been delayed but not denied. She opened the email, read the details, made notes, started building the file. Outside, the sun was setting over Magnolia Street, the same street her grandfather had walked for 40 years delivering letters, keeping secrets, preserving truth. The same street where decades later, his granddaughter was finishing what he'd started, making the guilty answer, honoring the dead, serving the living. One case at a time, one family at a time, one piece of justice at a time. The walls had given up their secrets. The truth had emerged from darkness. And Colonel Thomas Brennan Mailman and Marine guardian and grandfather could finally rest knowing that his silence had become the loudest voice of all. The voice that said, wrong can be made right, theft can be restored, justice, though delayed, will come. And it had.